Okay guys, just wanted to talk about the law and self-defence today, and with me is one of my colleagues. This is Pete Brotherton, Sensei Pete Brotherton, who's a charge officer, is that correct, Pete?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
He's a charge officer in a busy London police station, and just tell us what that means, Pete.
Well, in effect what I do is I review all the evidence that's brought to me and decide on the evidence if a charge is valid or not, and it's not always the case that it is necessary, and I think we're going to talk about certain aspects of that in a minute.
Excellent, excellent. So what Pete's going to do is just to outline for you now the laws that pertains to using your karate for self-defence. I'd like to take it right over, Pete.
Thanks very much, Matt. Okay, in essence there are lots of legal niceties that we have to consider, but in reality the answer is quite simple. There are two main aspects of law covering the use of force, and that's the Criminal Law Act and common law. Now, you don't need to know the exact ins and outs, but basically both those laws taken together say that you can use reasonable force in certain circumstances, being for self-protection, protection of others, protection of property, to prevent a crime, and those are the main things that we'd ever feel perhaps we'd need to use our karate skills for. I mean, obviously, it is going to be the last resort, but in the last resort you need to know that the law can protect you and will protect you, provided what you do is reasonable. And at the end of the day, Matt, that's the acid test, is in all the circumstances, did you do what was reasonable and no more? There's something I must stress here, is that the law is absolutely clear that you do not have to wait to be injured before you respond. There is a concept in law of a preemptive strike. And once again, in all the circumstances, if what you do is reasonable, that you do no more than is necessary to achieve your aim, that's great, and that's perfectly legal.
I'm just going to step in here again. So the idea of a preemptive strike, can you just define for us a bit more clearly the circumstances under which I could use a preemptive strike, what the definition of reasonable is in that situation?
Sure, sure. Well, the problem we have with defining reasonable is that each case will be down ultimately to a court, perhaps, but a preemptive strike would be if you had a genuinely held belief, and that's something that the court would probably have to test, but if you had a genuinely held belief that you were in immediate threat of physical violence, or your property was at risk, or your family were at risk, or you thought that it was necessary to strike before you were struck, then the law would take that into account. And I can't remember the name of the judge now, but there is case law where he says it's impossible in that moment to define precisely the level of force, and it will have to be left to each and every individual case. But the law is very clear that in essence, the circumstances exist and it's reasonable, then you don't have to wait to be hit.
So you gave me an example some time ago about a phrase that people use in London before they mug you. Why don't you talk about that example and why you think that is reasonable for a preemptive strike? Okay.
When I do this now, I must stress that these are my personal views and they aren't necessarily the views of the Metropolitan Police. But certainly it's not unknown in London for people to approach you with the intent of mugging you, and one of the questions they may ask is, what have you got for me? And I see this quite a lot in my job, that people are asked, what have you got for me? Now, in certain circumstances, that question can be seen as a precursor to a robbery, and if you genuinely believe that in those circumstances that is said with that intent, then I would suggest that would be reasonable for you to consider you're about to be mugged. If you're about to be mugged, it's reasonable to take necessary steps to prevent that.
Excellent.